Hey guys, stay-patient here, and today we're going to talk a bit about The Last of Us 2 and Naughty Dog in general. Now, of course, this was announced at PSX, and everyone's really excited because The Last of Us 1 was such an amazing game, but I'm keeping my expectations in check because I think there are some interesting observations you can make regarding the history of Naughty Dog and how they've changed over the years that could imply that maybe there's reason to be concerned about The Last of Us 2. And when I say concerned, I don't mean that it's not going to be a great game. It's always going to be a really, really great game. But, you know, The Last of Us 1 was potentially one of the best games ever made. So the question is, will this second game live up to that? Will it be able to carry on and, you know, gain the same reputation that the first game had? Because if you look back at the history of Naughty Dog, Sony have always used them as a kind of go out and do whatever you need to do to get the most out of our consoles team. They haven't hamstrung them in any way. They haven't said, look, we need a sequel from you for the next generation. We need you to create a system seller by giving everyone a franchise that they know and love. They've always let them start fresh on each console. So on the PS1, you had the Crash Bandicoot trilogy and Crash Team Racing as the kind of spin-off. And then when PS2 came, you had Jak and Daxter trilogy with Jak X, which was, again, a spin-off. And then on PS3, you had the Uncharted trilogy and then The Last of Us, which wasn't a spin-off directly, but it did have a lot in common with Uncharted. It's a very different game tonally and story-wise. But it was another, you know, third-person action-adventure where the interaction between your character and the other sort of AI companions in the game was very important. It told a lot of story through the exposition and things like that. So we've had this structure where Naughty Dog always start over. And the reason they start over each generation, or they were, is because they like to get the most out of whatever hardware they're working with. And in most cases, any ideas that they come up with that they think, you know what, this new console is going to be able to allow us to do a game with this feature or with this type of AI or with whatever ideas they've got that they really want to implement into a game. But most of the time, those ideas won't fit in with the world or the universe of the existing franchise. So the ideas they had for Jak and Daxter, they obviously thought, would that fit in with Crash Bandicoot? Is Crash Bandicoot going to allow us to use these ideas to their fullest? No, they're not. So we have to start a new franchise. And Sony were fine with that because obviously the PS1 and the PS2 sold themselves. You didn't really need anyone creating a known quantity, like a known system seller. It was more a case of just put the games out there. They're all going to be great. The system's great. And it was fine on its own. And of course, that sort of carried on into the PS3 generation. You had the trilogy and then The Last of Us. And it very much felt as if The Last of Us was like a self-contained title, you know, it had a beginning and an end. It was an amazing end. The story's incredible. It left a lot up to your own interpretation. And it's interesting, actually, that The Last of Us sort of started off life as Jak and Daxter in a way. I don't mean that they started making a Jak and Daxter game and it became The Last of Us. But what I mean is that when Naughty Dog were in a brainstorming session, trying to think of ideas for a new Jak and Daxter game on PS3, those ideas that they had, or at least the things that they were throwing around, you know, all the different ideas that were being tossed around were so good. They were so happy with them, but they didn't fit in with the Jak and Daxter universe. So they started implementing like a whole new idea for a game around the ideas that they'd had. And that evolved into what became The Last of Us eventually. And that's something that a lot of you are probably not aware of. And it's quite an interesting piece of trivia. But obviously, when we got to the PS4, for whatever reason, Naughty Dog decided to create a sequel for an existing franchise for the first time ever. And a lot of people don't really pick up on how significant this is because, you know, they'd literally never carried a series across from one generation to the next. They always start fresh and they always start with a new IP. Now, there's many reasons why that could have been the case. It could have been down to Sony. They could have realized that they had a lot stronger competition now in Xbox. You know, before they've had like the N64 with the PS1, and then the very first Xbox wasn't as strong competition as they are now. So it's got to the point where Sony have maybe said, look, we need you to release a known franchise that we can advertise and people know straight away that's Nathan Drake, and they're going to want to jump on the bandwagon because they know, you know, Uncharted, they know the series, they know the characters, and it's going to sell systems. That could be the case. It could be the case that when they lost a lot of their staff, not that long ago, a couple of years back, Maybe they lost some of their creativity. I don't know. Some of the key members, they lost Amy Hennig. She was one of the key writers for a lot of their stories in their video games. And so hopefully it's not that, because I'm sort of starting to wonder if maybe they've had some new staff sent across, because they did lose some staff. And if you think about it, they've really got 3 projects on the go now. They've got The Last of Us 2, which has just started. They've just started development on that. They've got a standalone DLC for Uncharted 4, which is the one with Chloe we saw the trailer for at PSX. And they still supposedly have a new IP on the go, which is what we all want from Naughty Dog. We love their series and we do enjoy getting sequels from them, but we don't know how much we want a new IP from them until it arrives. And that's always been the case, because everyone probably thought back when Crash Bandicoot stopped, they probably thought, no, bring back Crash, we don't want a new game. But then once Jak and Daxter was on the go, they probably thought exactly the same again. They forgot about Crash, which is now coming back, obviously, because everyone has fond memories of it. But everyone was more than happy with Jak and Daxter, because they realised that to be able to take games forward, you need to kind of start new IPs so that you can fit all your amazing ideas into the structure of the game. So, that same principle is true now. We don't know how much we want a new IP from from Naughty Dog until we get it, because when we do get a new IP, we'll never look back. We'll again not want that IP to end when the PS5, 6, 7 comes out. So hopefully they are still working on this sci-fi game that was announced or kind of leaked or whatever several years ago. But that does mean that they potentially have three projects on the go, and they've got, up until now they've had 2 teams. Now, of course, it might be the case of one of the teams is sort of taking a break from the sci-fi game and making the DLC for Uncharted, and then the team working on The Last of Us 2 is like solidly working on that, or whatever. I'm not really sure what the case may be, but my guess is that they might have had some staff moved across from other first-party Sony studios. Now, if that's the case, then, are they good enough staff to be working at Naughty Dog? Are they going to have the same investment in The Last of Us? If it is, if they do have new staff working on The Last of Us, are they going to be as invested in it as if it was just the people who made the first game? Is it the team that made the first game? I don't think. Let's have a think. They kind of tend to alternate. So I think it probably is the same team that made The Last of Us 1 that is making The Last of Us 2. But another big question I have is, was it planned from the outset? Did they write The Last of Us as a series, or was it written as a standalone game, and then Sony came along and said, no, you've got to make another one because it's so big, we need you to sell systems for us? Because if they are only making it because Sony have asked them to do a sequel that they weren't originally planning on doing, then that's a bit worrying, because it means that they're going to kind of have to fit the story around a story that was originally meant to be self-contained. Now, the ending of The Last of Us is incredible. The whole story is incredible. The character development throughout it. You can look at so many different layers, and you can play it over and over again and pick up on things you never picked up on. And you can discuss it with people for hours on end, just talking about the way it subverts expectation. You've got this character that you feel sorry for at the beginning, and then you realise he turns into a bit of a douchebag, but you understand why. And then as the game goes through, you start liking him more and more because he's sort of opening up a bit. This girl that he's with is opening him up, and it takes a long time, but eventually when she goes through a real traumatic experience, he starts actually seeing her as no longer as a kind of annoyance that he has to deal with, but as a companion, as someone he cares for, and the way it develops, but then it takes a turn, at the end, and it makes total sense the way it develops. It's not one of those twists that's like unexpected because it doesn't make any sense. It's not even really a twist. It's what you would expect to happen if these events were taking place in real life. You wouldn't expect it to happen in like a Hollywood movie, for instance, because everything would work out happy, and everyone would, everything would fall into place and work out, as it were. But just the way it ends, I don't really want to go into specifics, but the way it ends is just so absolutely, utterly brilliant. And the fact that you play as Ellie in the very last sequence, after you kind of realise the path that Joel's character development has taken, the totally believable and realistic path, but saddening nonetheless, you play as Ellie, and that's like so profound for me. The second time I played through, it clicked. I was like, wow, this makes total sense because Ellie's the hero of the story. Joel isn't. And so all along, I was kind of thinking that if they made a sequel to The Last of Us, I would like it to be a whole different group of people, somewhere else in the world, a different story being told. Maybe Joel or Ellie or both of them are involved in some way as NPC characters or something. Or maybe you just hear about their exploits or something or other. Maybe have a link or connection with some of the other characters in the first game. That would have been cool because it would have meant that the first story could remain untouched and would just be brilliant forever. But now that they're doing a sequel, and it contains, obviously, Ellie for starters, and Joel supposedly, although some people are saying that maybe he's not actually there. That would be quite interesting if he wasn't. But the fact that it is containing at least one, if not both of those characters, means that the story that has a perfect ending at this point, that ending is no longer going to be the ending. It's going to create a new one. And that's a lot to live up to because they're going to need to create an ending to The Last of Us 2 as good as the first one. And also, they need to be clever with the way they tell the story because, it could end up being predictable. I've been thinking it through, and there are several scenarios that could be the case. It could be that Ellie found out about Joel, about what happened in the first game. She didn't agree with it. And she, maybe left him. They went their separate ways or whatever. And maybe there's a coming together of them in some way throughout the game. But, this, I don't know, that would be fine, I think. I mean, it does look as though they have both characters in the game. Like I say, he could be imaginary. But if he's not, then he is there. Like, you do see him in the trailer. And hopefully it's not predictable. Hopefully they kind of wow us again and make us think, wow, I never even thought of that happening, even though it makes total sense. Because, in my opinion, one of the other scenarios isn't actually possible. There's a scenario where Ellie could have found out about what happened during, the previous game, and she could have ended up okay with it. She could have been happy with it, or at least come to terms with it and decided to stay with Joel. Now, that's not going to be the case, because if you think about it, if that were the case, then we would start off disliking Ellie straight away. I mean, we love her as a character, but that would be a pretty douchey way of her reacting to the events of the first game, right? So that can't be the case, because we need to at least start off liking Ellie. Like in the first game, we started off feeling sorry for Joel and started to like him, and then by the end we were like, whoa, he's a dick. But yeah, we need to like Ellie to begin with, so that can't be the case. So she either knows about it and has left Joel, in which case right at the beginning of the game we'll know whether that's the case or not, because it's several years later. So if she's found out about it, she would have decided to leave him by this point. So if he's there, then it means that she doesn't know about it. That's the bottom line. If he is there at the start of the game, that means that she doesn't know what happened. And if that's the case, then it's quite predictable that she's going to find out what happened at some point in the game. And I hope it's not just like a paint by numbers story where it's like, two oblivious character, or one oblivious character, in companionship with another, and then find out what happened, and they go their separate ways, and then maybe one rescues the other, and I don't know. There could be multiple scenarios that do end up being predictable. So all I'm saying is, I'm super excited for this game, but there are some things about the development studio, the fact they've lost a lot of staff, the fact that they're potentially working on 3 projects, which could mean they've got new staff, the fact that they're bringing out sequels to existing franchises on a new generation of consoles for the first time ever. And to be fair, I wasn't quite as massively sort of impressed by Uncharted 4 as everyone else. Graphically, it's amazing, but it didn't feel like they were putting quite as much into their first game on a new generation of consoles as they usually do. Uncharted 1 was amazing, the interaction between the characters and stuff was something that we'd never really seen on PS2. And it made us realise we were on a new generation of consoles. But that wasn't really the case. Apart from graphically, that wasn't really the case with Uncharted 4. They actually, they didn't give us even the kind of set pieces that we used to from the trilogy. They weren't even up to the standard of the trilogy, I don't think. The one main set piece where you're being dragged behind the cars and stuff, that was shown off at E3, so we knew to expect that. And there was no big sequence, no big kind of memorable sequence in that game. It was still a great game, and I have no doubt that The Last of Us 2 will be amazing. And the one thing that I'm kind of relieved by is the fact that Uncharted 4 did have a great story. It was really well told. So the fact that they lost people like Amy Hennig, who do a lot of their writing, or used to, I don't think that's going to have a massive impact. And I'm hoping that that means that The Last of Us 2, they still have the ability to write amazing stories, and hopefully the most important thing about The Last of Us being the story will still carry over in a wonderful way to the second game. But like I mentioned, there are a few things that that I don't know if I'm concerned or whether I'm just kind of keeping my expectations realistic, because the first game could be one of the greatest games ever made, and the second game I'm really hoping can follow suit. But there are some things that are telling me not to expect it to be the greatest game ever, but to be a decent game. And usually, the great thing about keeping your expectations down is that if you're not expecting something incredible and it ends up being incredible, then it feels that much better. So there you go, guys. Those are my thoughts. I just hope the game doesn't end up being predictable, because, like I say, it feels like the first game was a self-contained story. So when you add a story on, then it sometimes ends up taking paths that are easy to predict. And I hope that the ending to the story, the new ending that's going to replace the existing one, which was absolutely incredible, one of the best endings to any entertainment franchise, movie, game, book, anything, one of the best ones I've ever experienced. The new one has got a lot to live up to, so it needs to be great, and the story throughout the series needs to be great. And the other thing as well, we talked about character progression. One of the things that was incredible about the first game is just how the characters progressed throughout it, and how they impacted each other's character progression, the way they grew and the way they changed as the game went on. So is that still going to be a possibility in this game? We know both characters, if they are both in it. So yeah, who knows? I'm hoping the fact that they've still got great storytellers is a good sign, in the fact that they're going to think about all this stuff. I'm sure they are, and I'm really, really excited for this game. But I just wanted to kind of ramble on for a minute, because I quite like talking about video games, and I don't want you guys thinking that this is me saying, I don't think The Last of Us 2 is going to be any good. This is just me saying that my expectations for Naughty Dog games, because I've been a Naughty Dog fan since they started on PlayStation back in 94, whenever the first Crash Bandicoot was. It's been 20 odd years, and I've experienced every single generation where they've come out with something new that's blown us away. And I really hope The Last of Us 2 is that game, because, to be honest, I don't think Uncharted 4 was. I think it was a great game, and it was a great sequel to the Uncharted games in many ways, but it wasn't as memorable, and it didn't do anything really new that wasn't possible on a PS3. I think if you dumb down the graphics, everything in Uncharted 4 could have easily worked on the PS4. All the mechanics, all the set pieces, or everything, the AI and everything. They didn't do anything new gameplay or mechanics wise. It was just a game that looked amazing. So I hope that they're going to go back to their roots of only making games that can really kind of show what the next gen of consoles can do. And hopefully The Last of Us 2 will be one of those games that really shows us what the PS4 is capable of, as we've seen with a lot of the other games from different developers. So I think they need to up their game. Come on, Naughty Dog, prove to us why you're considered one of the best developers in the world. Alright guys, thanks for listening. You can take away from this video whatever you like, really. I don't want you to lose any anticipation for The Last of Us. I do think that you should keep a realistic level of expectation for every game that you get excited about, especially because we've had some that have disappointed us this generation, and also because games, like I said before, they feel even better if we weren't expecting them to be so good. Shadow of Mordor is a great example of that. No one really had any particular expectations for that because it was a new IP. It looked very similar to Assassin's Creed and Batman, and there had been some preview videos of it, but nothing that really showcased the brilliance of it. So people had sort of some expectations. They were like, it'd probably be okay, And then when it came out, the fact that it was incredible, it was sort of amplified by the fact that people just weren't expecting it to be so amazing. So there you go, guys. Just something, just an excuse for me to ramble on about games for probably half an hour or so. Let's keep our fingers crossed for an amazing game in The Last of Us 2. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you all tomorrow for the Trophy Hunters update. All right, guys, have a great weekend. See you later.